Okay. Today we have Dale Clevenger here. So may you just introduce yourself? Why are you here?
My name is Dale Clevenger. I've played in the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, solo horn, coming up on 48 seasons. And I am here to visit the workshop and to talk to the owner of this workshop, Dietmar Durk.
Okay, so we'll just start with the first question. How and why did you originally play the C.F. Schmidt horn?
Pure luck. When you're 17 years old, usually you get an instrument that your teacher recommends. And sometimes it's good and sometimes it's not. I was able at 17 to get a C.F. Schmidt made in about 1950. And I realized I had a very good instrument, but I didn't have other instruments, so I couldn't compare them. And with that instrument, I played in the Chattanooga Symphony, fourth horn. The lady who played third horn had a very old C.F. Schmidt, older than mine by about almost 45 years, about 1912. We played together with these two instruments, and on many occasions the conductor would stop and say, "The quality of sound is so even and smooth with those two instruments." So I realized I had something special. But it wasn't until later when I got in college and inherited the other Schmidt, the older one, which would be my horn through much of my career up until 1980, 82. But when you are a professional, when I finally got to be a professional, you're always looking for an instrument which is just as good as yours or better. You're looking for something that's special, that's unique. And it's just something that we do. We look for to see what's out there, what instruments are really good. Well, I realized that no other instrument was better than what I was already playing. But my horn was, since it was made in 1912, I realized it's going to wear out. It's getting old. The metal is, I don't know how much longer I can play this horn. As I told Mr. Durk, my Schmidt was remodeled 3 times and completely rebuilt once. So I won the Chicago Symphony audition on that, and I played in many other orchestras and many other jobs in New York City before I went to Chicago. And there were no high horns then. I did everything on that horn. And everybody who played that horn realized also this was something special. So it was pure luck that I was able to play such a fine quality instrument.
Okay. So how does the new Lewis and Durk Clevenger model remind you of that old Schmidt from 1912?
It is so much like it in terms of sound, in terms of legato, in terms of flexibility, of color of sound, in terms of evenness of quality and evenness of the notes throughout the entire horn. 4 octaves. And it is made with such high quality workmanship that every one that I have ever played, they're amazingly consistent. Amazingly consistent. And this consistency is what I must have when I'm sitting and playing in the orchestra. It's absolutely primary. I have to know that what I am going to do is going to happen. And there are not that many horns that I can do that on.
Okay. So when did you switch to the Louis Geyer model and why?
As I said, my Schmidt was getting older. And here's this young man who's making new horns, a Geyer model horn. And I thought, I wonder if he can make a horn which is really good in all the ways that I have mentioned before, and that I can play on in the orchestra. Because my Schmidt's not going to last forever. And I helped him go into business, and he started making instruments, and they were good from the beginning, not as consistent as they are now. And as his teacher, his mentor, hornmakers, told me, he said, Dale, Steve has golden fingers, which means he has a special Gefühl, for making instruments, a love of making instruments, and really well. And I find that same kind of Gefühl, that love, in the Durk horns. So the consistency is there between my C.F. Schmidt, my Geyer model Louis horn, and now the Louis Durk Clevenger model.
Okay, so can you give a little comparison between all these horns?
Well, the comparison, the statement that I would make is that they're all amazingly consistent and similar, even though they are shaped differently. The Schmidt model horn, or Schmidt piston horn, is one of the most logical and simple designs of all horns, and so is a Geyer model, and they're very different. But they're very symmetrical, and in a way simple. And if you can find two horns that are shaped differently, but really sound and play alike, this is very, very good. Because I believe in changing horns from time to time. I need to change horns for different pieces. Sometimes one horn will give me maybe one note that's really important, and another horn, that note is not quite as good, or not quite the same, or I'm not as comfortable on it. And as it happens, my Schmidt, my original Schmidt, my Geyer, my Louis Geyer, and now this Louis Durk Clevenger model, they are all so similar in basic character. To me, they all sound like the horn should sound.
Okay. What do you think about the collaborative efforts between Steve Lewis and Dietmar Durk?
I think it's fantastic, because it shows two really great artists found each other and collaborated and talked and together decided to collaborate on the building of an instrument, or some instruments, horns. And the results is super. Just super. Very few horn makers ever have that opportunity to find somebody who has such high standards, and that they can agree on their high standards, and that they can come together and produce an instrument which is just wonderful.
Okay. So is it easy for you to switch between all these horns?
Yes,
Is-
I have done it all my life. It is not difficult to pick up any one of my instruments. And believe me, all of my instruments are great. They're not just good or very good, they're great. And everybody, every horn player who ever plays any of them will tell me that. I had a very famous horn player in Germany, very famous. He picked up my Geyer and he played it and he says, "You have this horn and you don't play it all the time?" I said, "I have other instruments which are just as good or better."
Okay. So how long did it take you to get used to the new Clevenger model horn?
To get, if I know that I'm going to play a horn consistently and play it often and actually use it in the orchestra, it takes me about a month to 2 months.
Okay. So maybe for the last question, a little more personal. What does it mean to you to have a horn named after you?
I'm honored. It's something I never expected. Never expected. I was lucky to get the first C.F. Schmidt. I didn't know how wonderful they were until I started comparing it with other instruments. And I was lucky that I had Geyer that I could go over and watch him work and make new horns. And I was lucky to have the collaboration and the friendship of Steve Lewis, and that he made me a horn. And everybody who plays my Lewis horn, they drop their jaw. How can a horn be so good? And that is if you play a horn for sound first and for feeling how it blows second. To me, how a horn sounds is everything.
Okay, so thank you for the interview.
My pleasure.